You've been moving through life with a quiet kind of power that most people can't even name, yet they can't stop feeling it. When storms tried to swallow you whole, you didn't just survive. You kept walking as if the ground itself bent to hold your steps. There's a certain weight to the way you exist right now, a pulse in the air that tells anyone paying attention that something rare is unfolding in your story. The pressure you've faced hasn't been scattered or accidental. It's been precise, almost surgical. It's as if unseen hands tried to weave a net tight enough to hold you still, counting on you to panic and tangle yourself in it. But you didn't. You found the seams. You turned each knot into an opening. And every time the walls closed in, you expanded instead, taking up more space than they thought possible. None of this was chance. It was crafted with intent, like an architect building a maze to trap you in the middle. They studied your rhythm, took note of where they thought you'd hesitate, then unleashed wave after wave meant to bend your spirit until it broke. But instead of shattering, you reshaped. You've been rewriting the outcome in real time, turning what was meant to bury you into the very ground you're now standing on, taller than before. There's a truth about people like you that they never factored into their plans. You don't draw your strength from easy seasons or friendly faces. What fuels you isn't the comfort of harmony, but the unshakable core that remains when comfort is stripped away. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $20 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. When they set their traps, they assumed you'd react like those they'd cornered before, lashing out blindly, drowning in noise, fighting to be heard. They imagined you stumbling into their framework, playing a game they built, using weapons they chose. They thought you would mirror their chaos, matching their low pulse of hostility until you crumbled under its weight. The blows they dealt weren't clumsy, they were aimed with intent, reaching into places only trust had ever unlocked. They twisted the echoes of your openness into sharp edges, trying to cut away the integrity you'd spent years building. These weren't distant adversaries striking at random. These were familiar hands, deliberately turning closeness into a blade. Every move was calculated to flip the truth on its head, to cast shadows over your light and make generosity look like deceit. In their story, your strength became selfishness, your boundaries became cruelty, your achievements became theft. And their most dangerous weapon was the one they pried from your own heart, your readiness to reflect, to question, to give grace. They counted on that compassion becoming the very rope they'd use to bind you. There came a moment that rewrote the expectations of everyone watching. You stood in a way that made the air itself seem to pause. While tension twisted around the room and words were flung like arrows meant to pierce, you carried a stillness that wasn't learned from discipline but born from somewhere unreachable. It wasn't a performance of calm or the tightening of will. It was you stepping into a deeper current of strength that lies untouched by the noise of the world. In those minutes when everything seemed set to fracture, when the atmosphere was thick with pressure, you made a move no one anticipated. If you've been touched by God's goodness, don't keep it to yourself. Click super thank you, and sow a gift of $20 or more to help spread His light. Your giving becomes a ripple of grace, blessing hearts and building His kingdom. Let His overflow pour through you. You refuse to be dragged into the arena they built for you. Instead, you sank into the inner territory where their reach dissolved, touching the source that fuels you in ways no outside force can interrupt. This wasn't surrender. It was mastery. In that inward space, truth became clearer, and strength rose like it had been waiting for this exact hour to emerge. The harder they pressed, the more certain your footing became, until you stood on the absolute center of what defines you. What looked like silence to them was in fact you summoning forces they couldn't name, drawing alignment from realms outside their grasp. They burned their energy on visible battles, unaware you were fortifying from within, building walls they could never breach. And as they strained for control, the contrast sharpened. You weren't just enduring, you were embodying the very authority they feared you might claim all along. It reached a point where no one could deny the split that was forming in plain sight. Their movements became erratic, their tone sharper and more frantic with every failed attempt to undermine you. In contrast, you carried yourself with a steady presence that drew attention without demanding it. Those watching began to piece together details they had previously overlooked, the way stories from your detractors never matched, the strange gaps in their explanations, and the way their reactions often seemed far too forceful for what they claimed had happened. Your own conduct remained steady regardless of the setting. Whether in open view or behind closed doors, your choices aligned with the same internal compass. Actions matched words, and words matched values. That kind of consistency made people stop and reconsider what they were really witnessing. Some who had never cared for deeper meaning suddenly felt they were watching something more than human conflict. They began to suspect they were witnessing two entirely different modes of operating in the same space. On one side stood those fueled by insecurity, clinging to control as their only safeguard against feeling powerless. On the other was someone whose stability came from a source untouched by circumstances, a connection that didn't need defending because it existed outside their reach. For those able to see clearly, the situation became less about personal disputes and more about witnessing the strength of a consciousness anchored in truth. Your refusal to mimic their hostility wasn't passivity. It was a demonstration of a different currency of influence. While they attempted to pull others down to raise themselves, you showed what happens when power isn't taken from anyone, but flows from within. It was abundance in motion, not as a concept, but as a living state of being. As this contrast deepened, an unseen law seemed to take effect. Every effort to diminish your presence ended up shining a brighter light on their own motives. The harder they worked to obscure you, the clearer their own shadows became to the audience they had gathered. Without meaning to, they turned the focus inward on themselves. Their misjudgment was rooted in a belief that concentrated negativity could overcome anything if applied with enough force. They thought the right amount of pressure could fracture even the most resilient soul. But they overlooked a truth that plays out every time authentic alignment meets hostility. Resistance doesn't always break, sometimes it refines. Instead of seeing you weakened, people saw you sharpen. What was false began to fall away, not just from you, but from the whole situation. Their accusations dissolved under their own weight, leaving only the parts of you that could not be touched. This unshakable core didn't emerge because the attack stopped. It emerged because you refused to let them define you. Every attempt to distort your reflection only made the true image stand out in greater clarity. And so the spectacle they set in motion became something else entirely. What was meant to be your undoing turned into a mirror they could not bear to look into, one that revealed their nature to everyone, including themselves. There came a moment when the momentum shifted in ways they couldn't calculate. Each falsehood they threw into the air didn't land on you. It circled back and clung to them, revealing exactly how they related to honesty in their own lives. Each underhanded move became a reflection of their own emptiness. With every sharp word, their own fragility echoed louder. The equation was simple but beyond their comprehension. When true strength stands still, the counterfeit kind crumbles under its own weight. Those who had been casually watching began to feel a chill. They were no longer seeing conflict, they were seeing exposure. It played out like an unplanned unveiling. Those who had once appeared composed began showing signs of something fractured beneath the surface. Their gestures became jagged, their expressions too sharp, their attempts to control the room edged with panic. This wasn't a slow erosion, it was the sudden collapse of a facade. People whispered quietly at first, unsure if what they were sensing could be trusted. Many of these onlookers had been pulled in under the promise of seeing the truth about you. Yet the longer they stayed, the less sense that truth made. They started connecting the inconsistencies, the shifting details, the unsteady timelines, the strange intensity of reactions that didn't match the supposed grievances. What was intended as proof against you became a trail of contradictions leading straight back to its source. It was not the shadow of your character that was coming into focus, but the full outline of the machinery that had been running this entire ordeal. Days passed, and with each passing cycle of accusation, the shape of that machinery grew more visible. The part you played was constant, refusing to be drawn into their storm. The part they played was unraveling, clawing for control, rearranging their story, fighting ghosts they themselves had created. The difference was striking. You stayed rooted in the same center no matter the provocation. There was no scramble to adjust your account to fit the moment. Your story didn't need repairing because it had been whole from the start. Truth didn't demand rehearsals or rehearsed reactions. Meanwhile, their story needed constant patchwork. Details shifted to fit the ear of whoever was listening. Emotional displays arrived right on cue, crafted for maximum sympathy but strangely hollow when replayed in people's minds. Those who had once taken their side started to look again, not at the words being said, but at the patterns behind them. The shift among these witnesses was subtle at first, but permanent once it began. Doubt crept in quietly, then rooted itself firmly. People who had been certain of their stance found themselves unsettled by the evidence of their own eyes. They realized they were not watching justice unfold, they were watching theater. In that theater, the roles had reversed. The intended villain held their ground without resorting to the same weapons being used against them, while the supposed truth-tellers could not stop revealing the mechanics of their own manipulation. The contrast was too sharp to ignore, and those who once clapped for the performance began to step away from the stage. What started as a campaign to dismantle you became an unplanned confession from its own architects. The more they tried to shape the story, the more it shaped itself around their own actions. In the end, the audience didn't need you to prove anything. The proof had been delivered by the very hands that sought to destroy you. What was built to dismantle you ended up dismantling itself. The chain of alliances forged to damage your name began to fracture under the very weight of its own deceit. Every ounce of effort they poured into shaping a false image of you seemed to rebound, magnified, until the cracks in their own image became impossible to hide. What they had designed as your public collapse unfolded instead as their own unraveling, revealing how easily they could abandon fairness, compassion, and dignity when driven by self-interest. Yet the real story was never about their downfall. It was about your evolution in the middle of it all. While they drained themselves in endless cycles of accusation and fabrication, you traveled deeper into your own inner world, finding a steadiness that no outside voice could touch. The chaos around you became a strange kind of teacher, stripping away every reliance on approval and every fear of standing alone. With each surge of hostility, you found new layers of capacity you didn't know existed. It wasn't a rigid endurance, it was expansion. The more the pressure built, the more clearly your mind began to see beyond the noise. You could read intention before words were even spoken. You could feel the undercurrent beneath every action, knowing instinctively what was real and what was designed to manipulate. Your composure wasn't just restraint, it became a form of influence. People noticed how you could remain rooted while everything around you shook. That level of presence isn't born from theory. It's carved into a person through fire. And while they mistook your stillness for inaction, it was the very force turning the tide. This growth didn't stop at your inner life. It spilled outward, reshaping the space around you. Those who once saw you as a target began to see you as a reference point. An example of what it looks like when someone refuses to collapse under weight meant to crush them. Your resilience began to shift the energy in every room you entered. People who had been drawn into the conflict started reconsidering their place in it. Without trying to convince anyone, you became the quiet proof that alignment is more powerful than attack. The transformation you underwent was not subtle, it was seismic. And while they were busy reacting to each other's panic, you had already stepped into a different arena entirely, one where their strategies no longer mattered. In the end, the very environment they hoped would destroy you became the ground where a more expansive version of you took root. And by the time they realized the reversal had happened, the story was no longer theirs to tell. Without realizing why, People started moving closer to your presence, as though something in them recognized a rare kind of steadiness. Some felt a quiet reassurance they couldn't put into words. Others found sudden clarity about choices they'd been wrestling with for years. What they were sensing was the grounded energy of someone who had anchored themselves in the middle of a storm designed to dislodge everything stable. Life in those days became a living discipline. Every moment demanded you choose integrity over impulse, patience over provocation, alignment over appeasement. Each exchange became a chance to model what it looks like when the compass inside a person refuses to be knocked off course by noise or pressure. Those repeated choices, seemingly small in the moment, forged a resilience that now serves as a guiding light for anyone navigating their own unseen battles. Ironically, the weight they tried to bury you under became the exact resistance that built your strength. The pressure acted like a catalyst, speeding up what might otherwise have taken years to unfold. Every attempt to cloud your light stripped away another layer of what didn't belong, leaving only what was real. In that compression, your growth accelerated at a pace that startled even you, refining your clarity, sharpening your awareness, and expanding your capacity to hold space for others without losing yourself. With each attempt to diminish you, something unexpected emerged, facets of your being that even you hadn't fully seen before. Observers noticed it too, feeling both surprised and inspired by what they were witnessing. The quiet you carried through it all wasn't the hush of defeat. It was the sound of someone choosing not to betray their own principles for the sake of winning a temporary fight. This restraint wasn't born from fear. It came from knowing the cost of engaging on the wrong terms. To fight on their level would have been to forfeit the very essence of what you were protecting. Instead, you allowed the truth to do the heavy lifting, confident that the currents of justice move in their own time and with more precision than any verbal defense ever could. Your silence wasn't absence. It was strategy. In holding your ground without adding fuel to their fire, you left a space they couldn't resist filling. And in filling it, they revealed more about themselves than they ever could have hidden. Without your reactions to deflect attention, their patterns stood out in sharp relief. Every tactic, every motive, every inconsistency became visible under the light of their own behavior. The emptiness in their claims began to speak louder than any argument you might have made. That space you created acted like a mirror, reflecting the reality of the situation with such clarity that even those slow to see could no longer miss it. And in that reflection, people began to understand. Your choice to remain silent wasn't a lack of power. It was one of the most powerful moves you could have made. Choosing not to step into their arena was not an action. It was a deliberate act of strength. In a time when nearly everyone feels pressured to explain themselves, justify their motives, or counter every challenge, your decision to simply remain rooted in your own reality disrupted the entire rhythm of the conflict. It signaled a kind of inner certainty that many have never witnessed, much less lived by themselves. The stillness you maintained carried its own force. It began to touch the lives of those who were swept up in the noise, causing them to pause and ask themselves why they were so entangled in struggles that were never theirs to begin with. In watching you, they began to notice how much of their energy had been leaking into disputes that yielded nothing but exhaustion. Your way of standing apart became an unspoken invitation for them to reclaim their focus. Over time, that quiet presence began to speak in ways louder than argument ever could. It radiated steadiness, clarity, and a peace that wasn't reliant on anyone's approval. Those who were paying attention began to sense they were in the presence of something rare, a person who could remain unshaken in their own truth even while surrounded by forces trying to rewrite it. When the tension finally began to fade, the full picture came into focus. Those who had gathered expecting a collapse saw the opposite, an unbroken stance that made every attempt to discredit you look hollow by comparison. The difference between a life anchored in genuine alignment and one driven by restless ego had been laid bare in real time. The result for those who came against you was isolation. Their credibility eroded not through your retaliation, but through the inevitable consequences of their own actions. Every tactic they used eventually circled back, undoing the very standing they were trying to protect. The bonds that endured this period emerged with a depth they hadn't known before. Having stood through the same fire, they became fortified, rooted in a shared understanding of integrity and in the trust that comes from seeing someone's true nature under pressure. At the same time, a new circle of connections began to form. People who had been quietly watching felt drawn toward you, not because of a victory in some visible contest, but because of the way you stayed tethered to compassion when surrounded by its absence. They weren't chasing the idea of you winning anything. They were reaching for the example you set. You showed them that strength doesn't always roar, that love can stand its ground without raising its voice, and that it is possible to emerge from the most targeted attacks not only intact, but more certain of who you are than ever before. Those standing closest to the chaos experienced the deepest shift. People who had seen both the public accusations and the hidden coordination behind them found themselves confronting a truth that shattered long-held assumptions about loyalty, morality, and trust. Some had been long-time confidants of those attacking you, convinced they were defending someone unfairly treated. Others had been drawn in through appeals to their sense of fairness, believing they were shielding the vulnerable from harm. As clarity broke through, the realization hit with a force that left lasting marks. They had been maneuvered into playing roles in a plan that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with settling personal scores. Their good faith had been leveraged to prop up falsehoods, turning their genuine care into a tool for deception. The sense of betrayal they carried went far beyond being lied to. It was the weight of knowing they had acted in ways that conflicted with their own core values. That inner reckoning transformed many of them from passive participants into outspoken defenders of truth, not out of obligation to you, but as part of their own healing from the manipulation they had endured. Their voices carried an authority no outsider could match. They had lived on both sides of the story, witnessed the mechanics of distortion firsthand, and could speak with certainty about the gulf between your integrity and the tactics used against you. This shift from unwilling pawns to intentional protectors was something your opponents could never have predicted. In their attempt to assemble a crowd against you, your accusers had instead gathered a group of individuals who learned, through personal trial, how to tell truth from distortion. That shared experience bonded them into a community that stood for more than your defense. It stood for discernment itself. This new circle of witnesses became a potent presence, moving with a moral weight that can only come from being tested in difficult, high-stakes moments. They understood the cost of speaking up, yet did so anyway, because their credibility rested not on rumor, but on lived reality. From the crucible of this experience emerged a version of you that could not be shaped by public opinion or temporary storms. The fears that might once have pulled you toward compromise were transmuted into a clarity that no one could distort. The approval you might have once sought from others dissolved into a certainty of your own worth, a knowing that did not shift with the tides of perception. Your stance was no longer about defending yourself. It had become about living from a place no external force could touch. By the time the dust settled, both you and those who stood beside you had undergone irreversible transformation. The situation meant to diminish you had instead revealed who you truly are, and that revelation became a foundation neither betrayal nor falsehood could ever shake. What you carried out in this season was never meant to remain contained. It was shaping you for a purpose that reaches far beyond your own life. The endurance you forged, the insight you gained into the depths of human behavior, and the unwavering trust you anchored in higher order were not random rewards. They were tools, sharpened through trial, preparing you to become a steady hand for others walking through their own fires. Proof that it's possible to stay rooted in compassion amid hostility, to hold peace while surrounded by disorder, and to live in truth in a climate built on illusion. The more people learned of what you'd endured, the more they realized your experience had become a living demonstration rather than just a personal victory. You emerged as a reference point, a walking example of what is possible when a person aligns their entire being with their highest state of awareness. The path you cut through difficulty became a model for navigating life's deeper tests without losing the essence of who you are. The influence stretched further than you could have orchestrated. Accounts of your composure and choices traveled outward, inspiring others to reconsider how they met their own challenges. Your way of navigating adversity reframed what strength looks like, not in domination, but in consistency, not in quick wins, but in the long arc of integrity. Your transformation stirred something in the collective mind of those who saw it unfold. People began remembering their own deeper calling, their own reason for showing up in the world, the legacy they wished to leave behind. Your demonstration of unshakable presence called them back to their own capacity for grace, courage, and authenticity. That current is still moving outward. Your example continues to influence, often without your direct awareness. Observers have been quietly rethinking their patterns, asking themselves what it would mean to live by the same unshaken principles in the face of their own trials. What was set in motion against you ended up refining you for a role your soul was always meant to step into. While others exhausted themselves burning down their own credibility, you were busy building an inner architecture that will hold for a lifetime. The strength, the discernment, and the bond with higher guidance you uncovered are now permanent fixtures, untouchable by any external force. From this vantage point after the storm, you stand as evidence that the most enduring victories are not won through overpowering opposition, but by refusing to surrender the core of your being. You proved that holding your center can dismantle manipulation without ever matching its aggression. In doing so, you made it clear that those who rely on control and deceit hold no lasting power. Pressure did not diminish you. It activated the signal of a rare frequency that only intensifies when tested. People felt it, even if they couldn't name it, and it left a mark on how they now measure true strength. You didn't just survive a campaign designed to erase you. You became a living testament to the possibility of turning harm into fuel. Your presence now carries a silent invitation for others to rise above the pull of fear and to claim their own alignment with love, truth, and higher vision. This is how transformation ripples outward, quietly, steadily, until the whole atmosphere changes.